When you look at the policies of this administration, when you look at inflation, and the Democrats out of control spending, when the first thing that Joe Biden said at the State of the Union was how we need to send more billions of dollars to Ukraine, and doesn't even mention the American people, whether it's Joe Biden or Katie Hobbs or your local legislator, the radical left is doing nothing to secure the border. And that's a fact. That just goes to show you how out of touch the left is. And they don't have to worry about Joe Biden because they're going to cover for him no matter what he says.
Okay, guys, I get asked all the time, can Donald Trump win? The answer is yes. How can he win? We are going to get into it like never before in this episode. Where are those key states? What are the counties in those key states? What are the tactics that we need to win? We are going to break this down right now. Get a pen, get a piece of paper, get ready to write a lot of stuff down. But you are going to be the smartest person in the political universe of your world this weekend. After the show, I promise you, we're going to talk to Ashley Hayek, who's with America First Policy Institute. They are leading something called Project 19, targeting the top 19 states, 19 counties in key states. Before we get into this conversation with Ashley Hayek, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so that we can continue to grow the show. And number two, I want to introduce you to two of the amazing sponsors that make this show possible. All right, folks, in this ever-changing economy with the ups and the downs, if you want a place to diversify your investments, call my friends at Bishop Gold Group, or you can check them out at bishopgoldgroup.com/Sean, or give them a call, 844-984-1616. Now, you're getting bombarded with ads for golds and precious metals. Bishop Gold Group are the people that I trust. They're the people that I called. Yes, I've actually put my money in Bishop Gold Group's hands and said, tell me how to grow my investments. So if you got a 401k, an IRA, or you just want to expand your investments with precious metals, these guys will sit down with you and talk about the best strategy for you, just like I did. And the way the economy's going now, you need a place, whether it's gold, silver, or other precious metals. They will tailor a plan for you. Bishop Gold Group are the people that I trust. It's integrity, it's transparency, and these guys have the understanding of the market to tell you where to be based on your needs. Go to bishopgoldgroup.com to begin your journey with precious metals. You get a free gift if you do that, or call 844-984-1616. Thank you. Attention, animal lovers. If you've rescued dogs like I have, then you're going to want to check out the work of Delta Rescue. And you go to deltarescue.org. You can see it for yourself. My friend Leo Grillo, he started this all by rescuing one Doberman, and he named the dog Delta. And that stands for dedication and everlasting love to animals. That's become an enduring mission for Leo. It's now a no-kill sanctuary, not a shelter, a no-kill sanctuary. They take care of dogs, cats, horses that need nutrition, veterinary care, whatever, and they can roam free. This is all because Leo Grillo has created this mission. And our $5, $10, $15, $100,000 donations keep the work of Delta Rescue going on. But if we want to make this an enduring mission, to help this work that Leo has started go on for a lifetime, then check out the estate planning kit that they've got there and see if you can make Delta Rescue part of your estate so that this mission continues for a lifetime. DeltaRescue.org. Check out what they do. Check out the estate planning kit and help support this great, great cause. Hey, Ashley, welcome back to the show. As I said in the intro, I think this is crucial for people. I get asked the number one question is, can Donald Trump win? And the answer that I give is clearly yes. And so let me just kind of start backwards, which is you were on the 2020 campaign. When you guys started to launch programs at America First, were you one of the people that said, okay, I can help diagnose this because I was there and I know what the problems were?
Yeah, I would say so. I think when America First Policy and then America First Works were launched, it was really combining the best of the White House, the administration, the policy, but then bringing a different level of tactics to it. So having people from the campaign who knew how to, get boots on the ground, mobilize the grassroots, and then, pairing with a Hogan Gidley, for example. Hogan's an incredible messenger. Mark Lauder was on the campaign. So taking the message from both the White House, the campaign, the tactics from the campaign, as well as the policies from the White House, putting them all together. And that's ultimately how we determined we need to move forward out into the country. But it's really, I think just the premise of America First through President Trump that we saw from day one when he was inaugurated was it's about the American people, the forgotten man and woman. And ultimately, that's the goal of America First Policy and America First Works, is giving power back to the American people where it rightfully belongs.
Okay. So if we go back even a step further before we get into 2024, 2016, I retold the story in my first book that I mean, the New York Times, everybody discounted us. We couldn't win. The national polls were very clear that, and all that, not just the polls, the pundits, the Nate Silvers, the 538s of the world, the New York Times all said that we had like a 95% chance of losing. The polls, though, and I've always told people there's two different things. Polls are a snapshot in time. It's like watching a moving car. You don't know if the car is actually, in theory, losing to the other ones on the street or whether it's gaining on them. It's a snapshot. Data is where you start to really dig into stuff. And when you guys started to go through this process, did you look back at 2016 and say, here's what the polls got right and here's what they got wrong?
A little bit. And it's not even so much of polling, but like what were the ultimate outcomes and why were the outcomes there? So for example, if you look at 2016 and what happened around the conversation of energy, there was such an attack on coal and on American energy at that point in time. I think people thought there's no way a Republican can win a state like Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. But when you are literally, killing an entire industry of people, like we're seeing today, fast forward, that's where they underestimated the American people and the power of mobilizing, the grassroots and mobilizing them to vote on those key issues. And Donald Trump is such an amazing messenger, as you know. Build the wall, blue collar boom, all of those things that he was able to message on that resonate with the American people. It wasn't from a white paper in DC or some political consultant. It was literally direct to the people, whether it was on Twitter at that time. And that just got people really excited. And that was what really, I think, transformed how politics work, and people who continue to rely on political consultants telling them to not go into certain communities or not talk to certain groups of people because you're a Republican is doing it all wrong. And Donald Trump is really, he broke down the barriers and the stereotypes and continues to reach across the aisle, reach to, historically ignored Black communities or Hispanic communities with really great America First policies.
It's funny you bring up like Black men, for example. I watched a lot of conversation regarding the growing support of Black men for Republicans for Donald Trump. And you see a bunch of these liberal talking head pundits and hosts on the cable outlets shaking their head and scratching it. Like, how could this possibly be? And it goes back to like, I think what you were just saying, that they sometimes miss what's happening. They get caught in this bubble in Washington, D.C. or L.A. or New York and don't realize that the policies, both culturally, economically, maybe even security-wise, are missing segments of people that they're not seeing. I remember after the 2016 election, myself and a couple of the folks from the campaign went and sat down with then senior folks at NBC News who said to us, hey, look, we're sorry, we missed this. We're going to hire, I mean, their solution was to put up pop-up bureaus in what they called flyover country because they clearly didn't understand some of the issues that voters were basing their vote on. And that seems to be kind of what you're tapping into.
Yeah. And it sounds like they have not learned their lesson, right? Just after the State of the Union, the commentary from Jim Psaki on, what's Virginia's border state, West Virginia?
If you look at some of these exit polls, I mean, I live in Virginia. Immigration was the #1 issue. Yes. I mean, again, these could change in Virginia.
Well, Virginia does have a border with West Virginia. Very, very contested area.
Build the wall. Like, what?
Like, how out of touch are you to the American people? Lake and Riley in Georgia. Now we're seeing tons of stories pouring out of, victims of illegal immigrant criminals murdering, sexually assaulting innocent Americans, not to mention the thousands of people that Senator Katie Britt so rightly pointed out that have lost their lives from fentanyl, leaving major voids in families. But, that just goes to show you how out of touch the left is. And they don't have to worry about Joe Biden because they're going to cover for him no matter what he says or how he says her name or anything like that.
Right. And that's actually, we've talked about that all week.
Yep,
this
exactly.
idea that these guys, like, they focus on Katie Britt's one story or style, not actually the facts that she brought forward regarding the deficiencies in Biden's policies and what they're doing, or the fact that Jen Psaki made fun of people in Virginia who view immigration as an issue. because we've seen rapes and violent crimes happen, and yet we're going to just dismiss it because she must live in some kind of liberal enclave where that doesn't affect anybody. But they mock people who believe that this is an issue, or fentanyl that comes over the border might be theirs. When we fast forward from 2016 to say 2022, there was a lot of discussion that we missed these opportunities. But are there some silver linings that we should look at in 2022 before we just dismiss it as a bad year? Were there things that were happening, issues and victories that we might want to look at before we completely throw out that election as sort of a, gosh, we don't want to talk about it?
Yeah. And not to completely, I don't want to go too far backwards, but on 2020, we should have won 2020. There was so many rules that were changed. I recently did an interview on a news station, and I said, Donald Trump's policies were right. The people with his policies, COVID changed the rules of the game changed. And they said, are you saying that Joe Biden isn't the rightful president? And I said, no, the rules changed.
But they didn't. But here's the thing. This is where again, they didn't change the rules. Changing the rules is when, to me, when someone says they changed the rules, right? Like the NFL is considering a change to how kickoffs happen, right? They propose something, the owners vote on it. If a law is changed, proposed at either the local level or the national level, Congress or your town council deals with it and changes it. They just didn't abide by the rules. That's different. And that's what I think, these guys on the left are very key on language, right? It's not an illegal immigrant, it's a newcomer. And what they don't want to do is, and this is where I think we got to play their game, they didn't play by the rules. They broke the rules. They broke the law. Pennsylvania's constitution is clear. Wisconsin's state law about voting is clear.
Yeah, they cheated.
Yes.
And maybe that's what I said. They cheated. But at the end of the day, they did cheat. There was a lot of cheating that took place. And so now that some of these, rules that they cheated and changed and all those things, we have to play by those new rules, because they have now given themselves 45 days to vote, and we still continue to give ourselves 1 day to vote. And as we continue our discussion, if you look at places like Arizona or Pennsylvania, they've done mail vote for a while, but 2020 scared a lot of people, and it's like we went backwards in time. And that's really unfortunate. But the silver lining of all of this is in 2022, we did see an increase of suburban voters support, America First candidates. We did see an increase of Hispanic voters who supported America First candidates, same with Black voters. So we did see, 10%, 12% margins and changing, but the tactics weren't there. And that's the big differentiation.
Okay, so expand on that. When you say the tactics weren't there, what do you mean? If someone's watching this right now and say, Ashley, explain to me, what tactics didn't we get right, or what should we be doing in 2024?
So the tactics are, how do we make sure we're getting enough voters to the polls, right? You should know, in order to win, you need a so many number of voters in your state, your county, whatever race. If you're a candidate and you want to run for school board, you should know how many votes you're going to need to win your race. And so when we have all this amazing messaging and we have these great policies, and obviously when you look at the trends of people who typically haven't supported conservative candidates are now coming to our side, how do we make sure that we know who those people are? Literally, who are they? And how do we translate that into votes for the America First movement? If you look at Lee Zeldin, that's a state that had 22% Republican registration in New York. He ended up getting 48% of the vote. He was literally building out a ground game to mobilize. I would say that that's a win, even though he didn't win, the governor's office. That was a huge win. He picked up other candidates all the way down the ballot. That's how we ended up with a somewhat Republican Congress. That's how he ended up getting more seats at the county commissioner, state legislature, et cetera. So, and he did that by showing up into communities that consultants would typically say, oh, don't go to the Bronx. That's not worth it. Don't go to Queens. Republicans don't go to those areas. He showed up and he showed the American people, he showed New Yorkers that he cared. And so those are the types of tactics we need to think about when moving forward this election cycle.
So let's say I'm running for school board or state legislature in Arizona, and I hear what you're saying right now, and I go, great. Okay, how many votes do I need to win? How do I find that? Who's telling me that? Where am I looking?
Well, you want to look at past performance, and that doesn't mean just the last election cycle, but in a last presidential cycle, What did the vote counts look like? You need to find out what your district is, and you need to pull. You can get it from your county clerk's office, exactly the voters that are in that district. How many of them are conservative? How many of them are Democrat? How many are independent? How are you going to talk to them? How are you going to outreach to them? What percentage do you need? And you can get a lot of that information, how many voters you have, and voter information is public record. And then you need to work with your local party to get that data as well.
And so right now, when we look at 2024, you guys are looking at a universe of how many states and what are they?
Sure. So we're looking at 9 states, and this is part of a bigger pathway plan. So our pathway plan overall is chaired by former Congressman Lee Zeldin. Since he did such an amazing job in New York, we said, let's apply this to the rest of the country. It's the messaging and data lab. It's 5 pillars, messaging and data. It's unifying the movement. It's our Project 19, which includes our 9 states, our voter mobilization effort. And the last one is the America First Transition Project. How do you, on day one of a new administration, hit the ground running? Our 9 states they're the obvious states. It's Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Georgia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and I'm missing the last one, Michigan. And Michigan is actually, now that we are seeing the results of the presidential primaries, we're looking at states like Minnesota. When you have 20% of the Democrats who are voting uncommitted, that presents an enormous opportunity to take back a state like Minnesota.
So let me ask you, just before we move on from the states, I'm intrigued by 2 things. One, on my list, I've always said I think New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes are in play. It's eluded us a little. It's like Lucy with the football. Do you guys think New Hampshire can get ahead of maybe Minnesota on that queue?
Sure, I don't see why not. At this point in time, when you look at the policies of this administration, when you look at inflation and the Democrats' out of control spending, when the first thing that Joe Biden said at the State of the Union was how we need to send more billions of dollars to Ukraine and doesn't even mention the American people, I think states like New Hampshire, I think Maine could be on the table. Look at Nebraska.
Maine also divides up their their electoral votes by congressional districts. You got Maine too.
Exactly.
There's a play there. And obviously the Dems try to go for Nebraska's 2nd district. But on the flip side, there's 2 states that were on your list that intrigued me. You have Florida and Ohio. Mm-hmm. Ohio has definitely leaned more and more red. Florida, I agree with. Everyone forgets that, yes, we win, but it's not by that much. Why do you have Florida and Ohio in the sort of battleground group?
So Florida is a really interesting state, and I think Florida is a pretty solidly red state. But I also believe that you can't really take anything for granted, because if you think about an area like Miami-Dade that ultimately won Rick Scott his seat in the Senate. So Miami is going to be incredibly important. There's so much diversity and culture in the state, and you cannot take it for granted just because we have done so well in the 2 to 4 most recent election cycles. The other piece of this is there is an abortion initiative that is potentially on the ballot in Florida, and that is something that the left uses to mobilize their base. And so you really need to be paying attention and watching that in Florida to ensure that, we have our voters, our America First voters turning out. In Ohio, it's a different dynamic. And I think people also forget that, J.D. Vance was an incredible candidate, but it wasn't an easy lift either to get him elected to the U.S. Senate. You have the working class that's in Ohio. The U.S. Senator there is very popular with the working class because he's known for his amazing constituent services. And given that information, it's another state that you can't take for granted because he is on the ballot this year. Yeah. So how do you make sure that you're communicating the policies and the damage that this administration, the radical left, is doing on those industries, on, the automotive industries, for example, in Northeast Ohio, and convince and educate the American people. Also, look at what happened in 2022. That was not really a great outcome with the constitutional amendment on abortion that was on the ballot. It definitely shows that there could be some potential weaknesses, and it's something to keep our eyes on.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned one of the initiatives is Project 19. And correct me if I'm wrong, those are 19 battleground states spread throughout the 9 states that you mentioned that you think are critical, right? Explain what you will do and why this matters. and why. And this is the key. I think for everyone listening, we talk about battleground states, but you guys have really taken it to another level, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things. Number one, we have our neighborhood activists that are our America First Patriots who want to be a part of restoring America First policies. And so in our 19 counties across the 9 states, we're looking at how we can fundamentally reach into communities and change hearts and minds. And some of these counties, they're not necessarily blue counties or red counties or purple counties. They may have voted for Donald Trump. They may have voted for Joe Biden, but they're kind of the bellwether counties in each one of these states. And our goal is to continue to mobilize people around America First policies and not just win in 2024, but this is a long-term play. How do we advance policy in these states that will really, create a culture of self-governance? And that's through maybe school choice. Maybe it's, energy independence. Maybe it's, school board election reform. Opportunities. There's so many different policies that we focus on at America First that once we mobilize this year, we can continue to do that next year and for the next 10 to 20 years. That's really, really important.
Yeah. So let me just see if I'm getting this right. So let's take a county, for example, Maricopa County in Arizona. I assume that's one of your 19.
Right.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is that in Maricopa County, we're going to find out what motivates people issue-wise. So maybe it's, as you mentioned, maybe it's school choice, maybe it's school board reform, maybe it's immigration, as opposed to what candidate, so that we can take that issue up and down the ticket. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll give you another example of what's happening right now in Maricopa County. In Arizona, you have a governor who came out early this year and addressed the border as being the number one issue for her, that she is so concerned about the border. And we've been working with state legislators on policy to basically do what Texas has been doing and really give local law enforcement the opportunity to defend their communities. And in a party line vote, of course, Republicans in the Arizona legislature passed the bill. Democrats voted completely against it, and the governor vetoed the bill. And so now we're able to elevate the fact that you have all of those radical Democrats, a governor who's also radical, who's vetoed more bills in history than any other governor, who is not truly addressing the border crisis. So our message to the people of Arizona are, whether it's Joe Biden or Katie Hobbs or your local legislator, the radical left is doing nothing to secure the border. And that's a fact. Here are the facts. Let's educate you on these facts. And then how do we help support the Arizona legislature get something passed? How do we find the angel parents, to elevate their voices in these communities? How do we change hearts and minds and show that there is a path to America First policies at the ballot box this November and then beyond?
Okay, so let's just pretend for a second there's a viewer watching right now that lives in Maricopa County and says, okay, I got it. What do I do to plug into this? Like, what role and vice versa? What are you doing to them? How do you take what you just said and put it into practice with people in Maricopa County?
Sure. So a couple of things. Number one, we partner with a lot of local organizations in the state so that we can, figure out more what's going on and where the needs are. And then when people...
Wait, can you just stop for a second? I don't mean to interrupt
Sure.
you, but I think this is so fascinating because, I spent a lot of time in the party world. Like we had local parties, state parties, national party, right? But this is operating within or outside of that ecosystem?
This is outside of the party system.
Okay, so when you talk about local groups, who would be a local group that you would say, let's reach out to X to help us talk about Y issue?
So they're local, just grassroots groups. So maybe it's one of the chapters for Moms for Liberty or Moms for America. People that are actually, this is not a DC operation. This is a boots on the ground in the states operation. And that's the biggest difference, I think, from a lot of other groups. We need to be with the people in the communities. And so partnering with those groups, understanding what the needs are, understanding the dynamics, working together to change hearts and minds. That's really what we're focused on. People sign up on our website at americafirstworks.com. And then from there, based upon the issues they care about, we can either plug them into efforts that are going on in the states or on around a certain policy issue to advance policy, or to participate in our America First Patriot program to help mobilize it through this year and then beyond.
When things go south, are you going to be ready? Ready for that crisis when power goes out? Think about it. With all of the natural disasters that are occurring, attacks on our power grid, will you be ready? I will be. I have a Patriot Power Generator 2000X in my home. If the power goes out, I will be ready to power my fridge, our tablets for our kids, their computers, televisions, radios, whatever it needs, our phones. All of that can be taken care of through the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. The best part about the Patriot Power Generator 2000X is that it's powered through solar power. You get 2 free solar panels that come with it to power it. So you've got no gas. You don't have to worry about fumes or noise. You can bring it into your house. You can travel with it. No matter what, you, your family, your loved ones will be taken care of in times of crisis. It can even power your fridge. The best part, as I said, is that you don't need to worry about going and getting gas and refilling it. The solar panels that come free with it will be your saving grace. Go to 4patriots.com/Spicer, 4patriots.com/Spicer to get your Patriot Power Generator 2000X and be ready in a time of crisis. So I brought up data at the beginning, right? One of the big transitions we made with Donald Trump in 2016 is that the RNC had invested tens of millions of dollars literally trying to understand every single voter, creating a data file that could get shared, that when you went and talked to Ashley Hayek, you knew she cared about these issues. Here's her vote history, et cetera, right? What are you guys doing when you learn about these issues and you partner with a Moms for Life and you say, great, we figured out that these issues are resonating. How does that plug and play into the bigger system?
That's a great question. So first of all, it's good to start talking to voters because I can say as a resident in Virginia, I think I got 1 text message this year to vote, which was really unfortunate. And I hear that all the time from people. I'm a registered voter and I got 10 text messages from the left and I got 0 from any conservative organizations. And so I think there's a lot of assumption that groups are doing things and there's not really a lot of talking amongst each other. So I think just understanding, what we're trying to accomplish and how to move the needle in the states is going to be absolutely critical. The data. Oh, go ahead.
No. I think what you're saying is so fascinating because one of the biggest problems I think that exists on our side. Well, let me start with the other side. I think the way that the left works is they say, here's all the boring stuff that needs to get done. George Soros writes a big check, but registering people, understanding them, that's not the sexy part of campaigning. It's boring. It's not fun, but it's critical. And our side goes, can I run an ad? I'd love to put up an ad. And I'm going to be able to tell all my rich friends that ad that's on right now, I paid for it. And we're not good at doing the nuts and bolts. And it's expensive. Registering people to vote isn't cheap. And I feel like our side doesn't do, we want to do the cool, sexy stuff, run ads and be able to do that. But we don't want to do the spade work. We don't want to build the foundation.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And so, you look at groups like Scott Pressler's group who, goes and registers voters and Turning Point Action. They are actually building out teams in the states to do voter mobilization. And that's the type of, gritty work that has to be done. It's being able to know, who to talk to and when to talk to and what to talk to them about. But when we talk about data, I think it's also a term that's used so loosely, we know who to target. But if you're not using a voter file, then it kind of doesn't really matter. And that's just campaigning basics 101. You look at issues, what the left is doing, what the Democrats are doing, the abortion, like the initiative we just talked about in Florida, how they continue to make that a highlight of the State of the Union speech, how they're focusing on the student loans. It's because they know that they can use those issues to mobilize specific voters for the Democrat Party. And they're their low propensity voters. And they use that issue, they target those voters and they get them to the polls. And that's just something that conservatives have not done. So how do we find the issues that conservatives care about, elevate that messaging and mobilize people and get them to the polls? That's the key part that we need to do on our side.
Okay. So you just put your finger on the biggest problem, right? We need to find these issues. So what you mentioned, Scott Pressler, friend of the show, he's always talking about, he's on the road one by one, getting people to flip over, Turning Point out there doing, working with the young people. How do we, and what are you doing to coordinate that so that one hand knows what the other is doing and that there's not a duplicative effort? And if there's more than that, there's a unified effort to say, here's the direction we all need to be swimming in.
Right. I think, first of all, it's a conversation that um, it's not about getting the credit, right? And that we have to work together if we want to win. And insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. So, we have a great relationship with, we have a very formal public partnership with Turning Point Action. And so being able and, Tea Party Patriots is a part of our collaboration. And so being able to know who's doing what where is really important. And so those two groups are, big, powerful groups. And so we're able to talk with them about, how do we want to move the needle in our communities and then building upon that. But it's really about, identifying where we need to be and who's going to do the work. And by partnering with groups like the ones you just mentioned, the ones I just mentioned, Scott or Turning Point and Tea Party, we're going to have, I think, a very successful run this year. And then beyond that, because I think the other key piece that people forget is it shouldn't just end at the end of an election cycle. Right. It has to continue. And that is where we suffer the most. And America First policy and America First works are creating the infrastructure so that this can live beyond just November. We have to be able to pick up on day one of the next administration, whether it's at the White House or the State House or the school board level, be able to advance policies by mobilizing the people we've been building relationships with in the states on those key issues.
So if you think about it, like going into this election cycle in November, you've got the RNC and the Trump campaign, which at least this week, have kind of melded into one big blob. You've got the Trump campaign, new chairman Michael Whatley, the new co-chair Laura Trump, Chris LaCivita from the campaign playing this dual role, installing their people in key staff positions. Okay, so let's call that one big blob. How do you guys, as the next coordinating entity, work with, legally or not, that effort so that there's not a duplicity of effort, there's a unity of effort?
Well, we cannot coordinate with the federal campaign. So that's there. We won't coordinate with the president's campaign at all. And we have to be very careful with any coordination with the political party, which gives C4, any C4 an opportunity to be unique, and that we can really focus on the policy and drive the policy and maybe not, the candidate. A lot of people are a lot more comfortable talking about policies. They don't want to necessarily talk about an election or a campaign. But if we can get people to talk about the issues like the economy or the border or parents' rights, those are winning messages for conservatives. And at the end of the day, will help the entire movement in the long run.
How does what you're doing and what we're doing overall compared to what the left is doing and how they coordinate and how much money they're spending?
The left will outspend us 6 to 1, 10 to 1. Like they have always outspent conservatives astronomically. I remember when I was running Women for Trump initially it was the beginning of 2019, there was a group that I found in Ohio, and it was a really small group. And they had terrible branding, not very well known. It was a very mild name that you couldn't really tell if they're partisan or not. They're a C4 organization. By the time that campaign was over, it was in Ohio, by the way. By the time that campaign was over, that organization had full branding, a podcast. Kamala Harris was on their podcast doing events for them. And now they have chapters across the country. And that's the power of the C4. The Soros money, the DNC funding goes straight into the C4s that they know are mobilizing voters, mobilizing their people. And that's something that they've done for the past 20 years. They have no problem using national influencers to target local races, to bring a light, which actually helps them fundraise. They have no problem. If you remember in 2020, the black squares on everybody's Instagram account, that was not organic. There was not a movement to support Black Lives Matter. That was facilitated and funded by the left. And so that's something I think conservatives need to remember. And just Americans in general need to remember is that this is a 20-year, 100-year play for the left to control the American people, to have power, to keep people just completely under the thumb of the government, and to really install communism in the United States. We see this at their policies that are happening. And so we have to do everything we possibly can to fight back against that.
So based on the work that you're doing, do you feel like we can catch them or that we can get some degree of parity with them, maybe this election cycle or the following one?
I think there's a winning strategy at this point when we are hyper-focused Conservatives often tend to compete with one another as well. Who has the best messaging, who has the best outreach, who has the best events. We have to be in lockstep with one another and make sure that we're not worried about, maybe I was honestly very disappointed by the number of conservatives who attacked Katie Britt this week. The Democrats would never attack Kamala Harris publicly. She's not the enemy. Joe Biden is the enemy. Let's get behind Katie Britt and acknowledge that she was able to create a new dialogue about fentanyl on the border and elevate that framing. How about that? And so I think as conservatives, we need to be very laser focused on who the real enemy is and how we're going to win together this year.
One of the things that you brought up at the beginning of this conversation that I think a lot of people are concerned about is we talked about not following the rules or changing the rules, however you want to put it. What is being done on our side so that it doesn't happen again, so that people in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia actually have to, maybe Georgia's not the right one, but have to follow the rules and can't vote absentee if it's not allowed, can't use a drop box if it's not permitted. Like what is our side doing? What have we done since 2020 to not let them do what they did?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, America First has an election integrity team that has passed legislation across the country to make sure that our elections are secure and safe. Unfortunately, there are some states where you can't pass legislation due to the makeup and the fact that evidently Democrats don't want to pass the laws like voter identification in some places. Really unfortunate considering 80% of the American people want it. However, we have been looking at all of our target states to identify, for example, illegal aliens voting in elections should never happen. And so proactively getting involved in filing a lawsuit. AFPI has been involved in a lawsuit suing the Secretary of State of Arizona. That happened this year. Joe Biden signed an executive order of March of 2021. I think we've talked about this on your show before, which basically allows each of the departments and encourages and actually gives them metrics on how many people they need to register to vote. The Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Labor, et cetera. They're using the tax dollars to outreach to communities that are dependent upon the government and not just registering them to vote, but mobilizing them. And you know how that's going to play out. It's not going to be done in a nonpartisan way, even if they claim that it will be. So America First Policy Institute's litigation team partnered with some legislators in Pennsylvania and is suing the Biden administration for this executive order. So that's another proactive step that we're taking, working across the country to identify how do we address these issues and make sure that this does not happen again. We don't have the problems that we had in 2020. And I do want to say it came out, I believe, earlier this week that Michael Whatley, new co-chair, said that they are building out a massive election integrity team and having boots on the ground to monitor, the drop boxes, knowing what the rules are in each of those states is going to be absolutely critical. Making sure there's enough poll watchers and poll workers, and if that is a priority of the Republican Party, that's excellent, and that's exactly what we need. And in the meantime, groups like America First Policy Institute, and I think there's a few others, will be proactive in whatever litigation it takes to make sure there's no situation like we had in 2020.
So for the person that's listening right now that says, I voted last time, I think these guys cheated, I don't know what is your advice to people? Do you think it's safer and more secure this cycle than it was in 2020?
I think if you're concerned, you need to sign up to be a poll worker or a poll watcher. Like that's number one. Get involved in the system so you can understand what's happening and be a part of the change.
Yeah.
I do think it's a lot. I think it's a lot better, and I think people are a lot more vigilant. But the biggest mistake that we can make is say, well, I don't like mail-in votes, so I'm not going to mail in my ballot. Or I'm uncomfortable with early vote, so I'm not going to early vote. Look at what happened in New York in the recent special election, Santos' seat. Look at what happened that same day in Pennsylvania. The snowstorm in 2022 with Adam Laxalt, freak snowstorm in Nevada. We cannot take it for granted. They give themselves 45, 60, 15, however many days the states allows for early vote. We only give ourselves one day. We have to fully embrace all aspects of mail early voting in order to be successful. So my message would be vote early, tell your friends to vote early, get involved as a poll watcher or poll worker, and then join the America First Patriot group.
Yeah, two things about that. One is banking your vote. saves the campaign a ton of money
Yes.
because they don't have to chase you. They don't have to wonder, do you have a plan? So it's actually cost effective to do that. Number one. Number two, to your second point about poll watching, I would say this is like TSA. You know, they've got those signs that say, see something, say something. I used to get calls during my time at the RNC. Oh, you wouldn't believe what happened. And I'm like, did you document it? Well, no, okay, well, I can't do anything with that. You have to, if you don't document it, if you don't take a picture, if you don't write down the name, calling and giving some anecdotal thing doesn't work. And to your point, getting involved helps. The other thing, one of the other points that I want to kind of wrap with is the work that you guys are doing on the transition. And I've explained to people, and I wrote it in my first book about the transition. And Trump was very superstitious about not getting ahead of trying to pretend he was, or planning that he was going to win, because he wanted to, everyone said we were going to lose, and he wanted all of the effort to be on the campaign. But I don't think we were well served by the transition for a variety of reasons. Not that there were a lot of great people and we did a lot of great work, but we look at the difference between how Biden came in office and how he kicked off 94 executive actions to undo a lot of the Trump things. Again, I think that some of the stuff that Trump did right off the bat with steel, Dakota, Keystone pipelines was excellent. But I think that some of the people and the policies weren't as ready as they could. And I know you guys are doing a lot of the planning right now to help him. Walk people through what that looks like.
Sure. So we have our America First Transition Project, led by Doug Holscher and Mike Regas. And that's really looking at what does day one of a new administration look like. They have over 600 volunteers so far that are looking at every single department, and just what the plans, rather than looking for where's the bathroom on day one of the new administration, but like what actions can we take? You know, what are we capable of doing? What are the rules? You know, the reality of it is there is a bureaucratic class that does not want America First policies to take effect in a new administration. And they will do everything possible to stop a new cabinet secretary, a new director from implementing those policies. And so, you know, you look at Secretary David Bernhardt, he wrote the book, You Report to Me, and he documents and outlines some of the things that the administrative state, you know, the DC swamp did to undermine the efforts in the previous administration. Your point about executive orders, the first 48 hours, Biden signed 19 executive orders. President Trump only had one. So making sure you write the executive orders ahead of time so that day one of a new administration, you have those executive orders ready to go. And, you know, you can hit the ground running rather than trying to get your feet underneath you. And so, you know, the president, I assume, would be focused on winning. And so this gives the America First Policy Institute the opportunity to focus on the policies. And by the way, those policies, there's also an opportunity to take some of those to the state level too. So this is a pretty incredible opportunity we have. So
I got about 30 seconds left, but basically if I'm hearing this right, it's like a menu, and it's like he can open it on day one and say, great, I want to take these, and not these. So it's not prescriptive. It doesn't have to do this. It's like, these are, you know, shovel ready, to quote an infrastructure project kind of thing. You get to pick what you want, Mr. President, to get these done. Right. Is that an accurate?
That's exactly right. Yep, yeah. Exactly. And, you know, legislative, different plans for the agencies. So that way we can be as successful as possible.
All right. Last thing, where can people go? You mentioned some of the things. If just real quick, where can people go to be part of this effort on any of the fronts?
Yep. If you go to americafirstworks.com, it'll pop up on the screen, type in your information, and we'll follow up within 48 hours to get you plugged in.
All right. Ashley Hayek, thanks for being with us. As I said, this is crucial for people to understand how we're going to take back the White House and then how we are going to execute the America First priorities that President Trump has laid out. Thanks for being with us as always. Folks, thank you for being with us to end out a week on a Friday. I hope you have a great weekend. Please remember to subscribe, to share, help do everything you can to grow the show. We're here for you to bring the guests, the topics that we know are important as we head to this critical election. So sharing this, subscribing, hitting that notification button on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and Apple is key. Thanks for watching if you're watching on the first, but you can also subscribe to show your support. We will see you back here on Monday. Have a great weekend. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.